We intercepted a transmission with General Lothar Brandt. Listen.
Haben mich diese Idioten in Berlin aufs Labor X verbannt. Brüder, in ihnen befindet sich jeweils ein Hauptcomputer abgeschirmt vom Stadtband elektronischen Netzwerk. Alle Informationen zur Labortechnik aufgeteilt auf die Brüder. Ich will das.
I've never been a massive fan of the Wolfenstein series, and this isn't to say I dislike it, it's simply that, as a franchise, it's not something I've ever jumped into, despite the high level of praise it receives from critics and fans alike. However, when the latest in the rebooted series, Youngblood, was shown on stage at E3 2018, and announced as a cooperative experience involving the twin daughters of series mainstay protagonist BJ Blazkowicz, and was marketed in a truly 80s style and what appeared to be a strong narrative, much like the rest of the series, I was all in. Alongside supporting studio Arcane Leon, the developers in charge of Dishonored 2, my interest was piqued, as I love the first Dishonored game, and I'm a huge fan of the immersive sim genre in general. With the developers speaking about more open-ended level design and more ways to tackle the missions at hand, this game looks set to be a great combination of top-quality first-person shooting action and creative, immersive play. Little did I know that by the end, this game would feel like a chore to complete, with some god-awful game design choices, cookie-cutter narrative, and a switch to a level-based gameplay loop. So even though this review is incredibly late, I still wanted to give my thoughts on the latest game from Machine Games and Arcane Studios, Wolfenstein Youngblood. So, let's begin. Wolfenstein Youngblood puts you in the shoes of either Jess or Soph Blazkowicz in a co-op shooter set in Nazi-occupied Paris in 1980, where the twins are tasked in tracking down their missing father BJ. And this in itself sounds like a recipe for a fantastic title. Youngblood starts off with an emotional scene, introducing the player to the two protagonists, and the opening mission is actually wonderfully orchestrated and a hell of a lot of fun. However, once the game gets going, unfortunately the mission structure and design is a complete letdown. The first few hours are roaring good fun, being set loose in the streets of Paris to tackle both side missions and the main quests, which are confusingly labelled as raids. We'll get into that in a moment. And initially, the DNA of Arcane Studios shines through with open-ended areas to traverse, which gave me vibes of a game I thoroughly enjoyed, Deus Ex: Mankind Divided. There is intel to find scattered throughout the streets of Paris. There are buildings to traverse through which give both depth and verticality to the level design. Your main base of operations lies within a retrofitted Paris catacombs, and there are tons of Nazis to butcher along the way. Again, this sounds great in theory, but once the new car smell of the game dissipates, the game is unfortunately repetitive, empty, and at times broken. Missions play out in the most standard fashion, being tasked to enter one of 3-man hub areas to hunt down intel or a specific enemy to assist the resistance. And while on the way to these missions, your friend Abby will radio the twins with repeated and simple tasks to complete, just to pad out the game with more content. And now, I'll give the game credit where it's due. The gunplay is mostly enjoyable, with, once all is said and done, an exciting arsenal of weaponry to tackle any combat encounter. However, this fun gameplay is hampered by two main issues. The first being that enemies are now level-based, a first for the series, and if you attempt to approach certain missions too early, you're unlikely to be able to whittle down their health. And again, it seems like this is done purely to pad out the gameplay and force the player to level up. Yes, that's right, there are RPG-light mechanics in Youngblood, and very light for that matter, with a leveling system that, to be honest, is entirely pointless. Why Machine Games decided to approach gameplay like this is just beyond me, as it makes playing alongside a friend in co-op who hasn't leveled up to your progress incredibly difficult and unbalanced. Skill points are doled out when leveling up, and a small selection of abilities are purchased, which don't really change gameplay significantly and only serve again to potentially pad out the length of the game. The second issue is that enemies are now complete and utter bullet sponges. Not only that, but certain enemies have light armor and others have heavy armor, and specific guns are required to more easily break through it to take down their health. I can understand this from a gameplay perspective, especially because some enemies are incredibly well armored like the super soldiers, citadels, and panzerhuns, and these foes would require more damage output. But for every single enemy to require a hail of bullets is just ridiculous. The two different types of armor also mean you're constantly swapping weapons, which on the surface is fine, but you're always constantly running out of ammunition, causing you to flail idiotically and attempt to drop enemies with unsuitable rounds. This becomes particularly frustrating throughout the middle of the game, where you may not have the entire weapon wheel at your disposal, and are constantly scrounging for the ammo type that you require. It becomes slightly less tiresome towards the ending of Youngblood, but switching weapons literally every few seconds is incredibly tiresome and a shocking piece of game design. All in all, although the combat is smooth to experience and can be super fun at times, with some cool weapons at your disposal, this is a huge misstep for a series that, as far as I can tell from reviews and friends who've played it, prides itself on its shooting mechanics. Additionally, the characters and narrative in Youngblood are supremely disappointing. Jess and Soph act like loudmouth frat boys throughout their entire campaign, constantly bantering back and forth, and disappointingly lack any real emotion and seem to not grasp the magnitude of the situation they're involved in. The supporting cast are, somehow, even worse. And this goes for the overarching plot as well. There is a big plot twist towards the end of the game, and I obviously won't spoil it here, but there is no foreshadowing, even though it's a pretty obvious turn of events. And as you progress throughout the story, there's no drive against a dangerous antagonist or villain, which makes the ending of the game feel like you've barely accomplished anything. Yes, you're searching for your father, and this is the main drive towards results and completion, but the narrative twist and the ending itself just feels out of place and forced in every conceivable way. If you've watched my latest video, I recently and finally got around to experiencing id Software's Doom from 2016, and something that stands out in that game, something that is inescapable and constantly driving your progress, is the music. Jumping straight from that game into Youngblood was a very strange experience. I was expecting 80s synthwave tunes to be pumping throughout the combat scenarios, which seemed to be a focus in the trailers leading up to release. And I was expecting to be wowed by the soundtrack as I was with Doom, and actually have been with quite a few titles this year. But Youngblood is entirely devoid of a soundtrack. There is diegetic music that plays from tape players and radios as you venture throughout the game, but there's no backbeat to combat, and after playing Doom, this was just a huge letdown. Audio in general, but very much so the in-game music, is such an integral part of any game, especially where it is used to build tension and create emotion throughout the story. But just as the story in Youngblood feels bland and devoid, so too does the soundtrack. In a year where we've had smaller titles and indies like Katana Zero or A Plague Tale beautifully weave their soundtracks into the gameplay experience, Machine Games has severely dropped the ball in regards to their score. As I mentioned before, the three main quests, if you will, are labelled as raids, and require Jess and Soph to infiltrate heavily guarded compounds in order to kill a big boss, some Nazi commandants, and secure some intel for the resistance. With the game's open-ended design, you can tackle these missions in any order once hitting level 20, and there are a couple of ways to find entrance into the complex for the raid missions. The main entrance will be incredibly hostile and swarming with Nazis, but another entrance method may be more stealthy and require a little more searching and questing. For the first and second raid missions, I found the alternate path into these levels, and these were somewhat interesting little missions that made approaching the main quest slightly deeper, but by the time I got to Brother 3, yeah, they're super creatively named as well, I just couldn't be bothered and wanted it to be over, so I went through the front gate and took on a load of Nazi scum. And these Brother missions are fine, but again, unfortunately repetitive. They literally all play out like this: infiltrate the base, kill everything in your way, find a specific new craftwork weapon that will allow you to progress, fight a big-ass Uberguard boss and kill 2 commanders, take their keys, and send this info to the resistance. Then, instead of doing a typical video game thing where the mission ends, cutscene, and you're back in the catacombs, the sisters are required to go all the way back through the building they infiltrated and escape to safety. There is literally no story here, and it's just so incredibly frustrating. But what is more frustrating is what happens if you die during a raid mission. In Youngblood, when you're down but not out, your sister can revive you relatively quickly, but if you both go down or your sister fails to reach you in time, you lose a shared life. You can have a maximum of 3 shared lives, and once they're depleted, you're back at your last checkpoint. This is fine when traversing the streets of Paris, as the game seems to checkpoint pretty regularly, but you also keep any items or coins or anything you find before you die. However, in a raid mission, if you die, even at the final encounter with the Uberguard, you have to start the entire mission from the start. This is exactly what pushed this game over the edge from enjoyment to pure frustration. I played the game mostly solo with an AI partner, and yeah, this is probably my first mistake, but I didn't want to play with randoms, and my partner and I didn't get a chance to play together much at all. And in the second raid mission, my AI sister refused to get out of the firing line against the Uberguard, and upon trying to revive her, I got shot down and we ran out of our shared lives. And back to the start of the mission I go. This was like 45 minutes of gameplay down the drain, and this is probably the reason why my review is so late. I just had to put the controller down and quit. This is shockingly stupid game design, which I'm sorry, you just can't get away with by calling the mission a raid. What's more frustrating is that you still have everything you've collected, so you don't even need to retrieve the craftwork weapon anymore. You just power on through the level with it already in your arsenal. Thankfully, when the final boss glitched out on me and dematerialized, failing to trigger the next part of the encounter, and forcing me to quit to the main menu and reload my save, it did load from a checkpoint. But in these raid missions, I personally think this is a huge design flaw. Because it's 2019, and because video game publishers are video game publishers, I regret to inform you that Wolfenstein Youngblood, a cooperative story-based shooter, has microtransactions. Throughout your time in Paris, you find silver coins, and these are used to purchase weapon mods, skins, helmets, and boosts. They are in abundance, but not really enough to actually upgrade everything entirely, unless you choose to grind out side missions and tasks and keep playing for much longer than the story itself would take. However, if you choose to sign in with your BethesdaNet account, which unfortunately you are forced to do to play online in any way, shape or form, you're able to purchase gold bars from a microtransaction store to purchase cosmetic upgrades. Now, I know some people don't care if it's just cosmetic, cue the disembodied voice of Jim Sterling, but I have issue with publishers like Bethesda feeling the need to add microtransactions to a game like Wolfenstein when there is simply no need. I hate to see publishers who used to be such paragons of the industry resorting to nickel and diming customers in almost every single game now. And although online games occasionally get a pass from the community, to put them in a game like Wolfenstein is just deplorable. Wolfenstein Youngblood is, in Australia, a $50 game, and I thought that was quite reasonable given the scope of the title and the well-respected teams behind the development. But if the cost of saving money on the initial purchase is outweighed by in-game purchases, I'd prefer to pay the usual full price and get these trash mechanics out of a game which is ostensibly a narrative experience. If you plan to play Wolfenstein Youngblood, even after seeing this review, or the reviews from many other people with similar sentiments, and you don't want to play with friends or online, I highly recommend you just don't sign into BethesdaNet. When you're not signed in, the microtransactions just don't exist. There is no store, there is no gold bar currency option in your face when you want to spend silver coins to upgrade your cosmetic appearance. And even though the obnoxious message of the day will repeatedly advise you of the option to purchase, you won't have to deal with this huge disappointment of a feature. I went into Youngblood with a big smile, a fresh-faced and naive player ready to experience everything Machine Games and Arcane Studios had to offer in a gritty co-op shooter in an alternate 80s dystopia, ready to find my dad and save the day whilst killing uncountable amounts of Nazi scum, and I was disappointed at every single hurdle. Youngblood had the chance to do something different with the series, especially with the support from Arcane, but seemed to trip up on every obstacle. A disappointing plot with bland characters, bland gameplay, bland world and many design choice mistakes has turned what could have been a hugely successful and enjoyable cooperative romp in a series that has so far been a massive success into a boring and tiresome title that, even for a reduced price, should probably be skipped entirely. I was having a great time for the first few hours, and I still had high hopes, but its repetitive structure and almost entire lack of story wore away the further I dove into Wolfenstein Youngblood. I sincerely hope that Machine Games have learned from this experience and endeavour to return to their usual form in the inevitable sequel that is still to come, and I hope that this isn't the downfall of the series as a whole. So thanks everyone for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Wolfenstein Youngblood in the comments below, as even though I was hugely disappointed by this game, there are many out there who have thoroughly enjoyed what it has to offer, and if that's you, let me know. If you want to keep up to date with everything I'm playing and the videos I'm working on, make sure you subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter @Direckt Gaming. And if you want to hear my unabridged thoughts on everything in the gaming industry, go check out our podcast Spawn Respawn. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Podbean, and we'd love your support over there too. I also write articles for an amazing website, 181gaming.com, and if you want to support a great cause, check out #Project181 on Twitter as well. Myself and a whole lot of awesome creators, streamers, podcasters and writers are supporting a great cause by raising funds for Gamers Outreach and hoping to get donations towards a go-kart for a kids' hospital. These go-karts are mobile gaming stations that give kids in hospitals the ability to enjoy the best pastime in the world. You'll find the link below the video as well if you want to donate directly, and any support would be hugely appreciated. Again, thanks so much for checking out my latest review. The support really means so much, and if you really dig this content, share it with a friend or two as well. Thanks again, and until next time, peace.